Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor, and of course, this is the place to be for all the discussions related to the GOP nomination process. The debate, the first debate, is next Wednesday, and things are going to heat up quite a bit. Let's bring in someone who's been there 8 years ago, Dr. Ben Carson, who was a front runner for a while in the race until, well, like all the other candidates, you got trumped. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Carson.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
As you watch this process unfold and the drama over the debate and loyalty pledges and whether Trump will show up and all of that, does it sort of give you some PTSD from 8 years ago?
Well, it seemed like it was more peaceful 8 years ago. It seems to be getting more and more chaotic as time goes on, and people are much more combative and hateful. The two sides seem to have less things that they can agree on, and they seem to have different goals.
Yeah.
Years ago, Republicans and Democrats argued a lot, but they wanted the same things. Now they don't want the same things. It makes it very difficult to compromise.
Yeah, I want to explore that a little bit further, but first I would love for you to comment on another development that is new, and that is the weaponization of the law of the federal Justice Department, but also in New York and Georgia this week with these indictments against President Trump. When you look at what President Trump is indicted for, it's for having a different opinion about the outcome of the election, and his lawyers are even indicted for giving him legal advice in that vein. Do you find this to be a dangerous development?
Incredibly dangerous. Benjamin Franklin said in 1787, after the last Constitutional Convention, he was asked, "What do we have here, sir? A monarchy or a republic?" And he said, "A republic if you can keep it." We're as close to losing it right now as we have ever been. The rule of law has been thrown out of the window from the upper echelons of government to the streets, and people are afraid. And, this election is really not so much about Donald Trump as it is what he represents. He represents the people and freedom. And he's being persecuted, prosecuted, unfairly treated by a justice system that will be coming after us, the people, if this is allowed to succeed. And I think a lot of Americans realize that. The American people are not as stupid as the left thinks they are. And they recognize the implications of what's going on. And that's why you see more and more people moving toward Trump. Not because they like him, but because of what he represents to them.
Well, and Dr. Carson, I think that's part of why after your time serving as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development in the Trump administration, you founded American Cornerstone Institute. You want us to come back to those cornerstone values and principles that, as you just mentioned, Republicans and Democrats used to agree on. There used to be some givens in this country. I mean, I like to say it was only about a minute and a half ago where Democrats would agree that biological men shouldn't be naked in a locker room in front of a 14-year-old girl without her consent. How did we get here so quickly?
Well, it really isn't all that quickly. If you go back and you look at the congressional record, January the 10th, 1963, 60 years ago.
Wow.
Read into the congressional record were the 45 goals of communism in America. They included such things as gaining control of the school system so you could indoctrinate the kids, driving a wedge between parents and students, gaining control of the media so you could spoon feed the people, getting rid of God and faith. The list goes on and on. Deteriorating the morality of people, this whole transgenderism stuff. All of this is part of the plan to fundamentally change us. And that was the reason that Khrushchev told Eisenhower, your grandchildren's children will live under communism. They had a plan, and we think we won the Cold War.
Well, and I've heard you point out the fact that the ideas that are now mainstream in our government-run schools and our public school curriculums as young as kindergarten, that's also contributing to this. There's a reason why children are graduating now thinking that global warming is the greatest threat, and they're willing to give up their liberties to the state. These are all socialist ideas that they've been indoctrinated with. At American Cornerstone Institute, you're actually combating that with your own curriculums, aren't you?
Yes, we have the Little Patriots Learning program, littlepatriotslearning.com. We teach all of American history, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But of course, there's a lot more good than there is bad and ugly. And you have so many organizations, trying to capitalize upon slavery and other things and saying that this is the core of who we are as a people. What a bunch of garbage. America is an amazing place with an amazing history, and when it's taught the right way, the kids love it. And we have the Star Spangled Adventures, which are a cartoon animated series about American history that is so good. The kids, as soon as they see an episode, they want to see the next episode. And it does cost money to produce all these things, there's no question. But it's free of charge because we've gotten patriotic Americans to underwrite the program.
That is fantastic.
And continue to add content.
Well, and I know someone who is personally using this to supplement her homeschool curriculum for her children, and she swears by it. She loves it. And the kids are actually engaged in it. It doesn't even feel like they're learning, which is kind of the secret.
Fun.
Yeah. So
it's good for adults too, by the way.
Yeah, I'll learn something. God knows we can all. I went to public school. God knows there's things I need to learn. Dr. Carson, as we get toward the debate next week, I wonder if you could give some unsolicited advice to these candidates. Is that they got to break through somehow. You were able to do it. You broke through from the first debate to the couple of debates in. You spiked and started to make some noise in Iowa and everything. What lane should these candidates try to fill to appeal to those voters, and how do they break through all the noise?
Well, my philosophy was simple. Just tell the truth. Always tell the truth. And then you don't have to try to remember what you said 3 weeks ago or 3 months ago. And you can concentrate on getting your message across. And that's what they need to do. And Republicans and conservatives need to understand that whoever wins the primary process, that's the person you have to get behind. None of this never this person and never this person garbage, because that's the same as voting for the progressives. That's the same as voting to fundamentally change our nation. We don't have much more time. We're at the precipice right now. Yeah. And if we allow the progressives to gain more power, forget about it. And, I talk to people in other countries all the time, and they all ask me the same question. What happened to you guys? They can't believe it.
Yeah, it's remarkable. I hear that too when I travel abroad as well. This is not the America they remember. Dr. Carson, just in our last minute, is there any of the candidates, setting aside President Trump, because he's his own man and you worked for him in his administration, of the other candidates, is there anyone that you're sort of looking at and say, sort of identifying with and saying, yeah, you know what, this person's kind of going about it the right way. I find a lot of value there.
Well, as you know, Trump has proven that he's a good leader. If he can control his mouth, I think we got a really good leader there. But in terms of the other people, this is the time for them to display who they are, and what their policies are, how they react to different situations, particularly some unpredictable things that are going to be coming up in the future. Well, and we ought to be watching carefully who they are, what they have to say.
Let the Republican field be on notice. Dr. Ben Carson is ready to be impressed. Dr. Carson, thanks for joining us, sir. American Cornerstone Institute. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight. Earlier this year, Representative Bob Good of Virginia told us that he thought President Biden should be impeached because of his border policies. So I've got to think the events of the last week or so may have even intensified the interest in impeachment process. Let's bring in the good congressman from the 5th District, Bob Good. Thank you for joining us, Congressman.
Great to be with you once again, Larry. Thanks for having me.
Well, I agreed with you then that the border policies themselves are enough for impeachment, and those policies continue, as you know. But now we've got this cynical move by Merrick Garland appointing this special counsel who is part of the problem, David Weiss. He's been investigating the Biden crimes for 5 years, dragging his feet, letting the statute of limitations run out. We now have testimony from IRS whistleblowers corroborated by FBI agents saying that they've been getting mixed messages, if not outright lies, about this investigation. Why should the American people trust that justice is being done here? Isn't it time for impeachment?
The last part of that question, yes, it is time for impeachment, and no, the American people should not trust in this Department of Injustice based on past history. as I think you would agree, setting aside the border invasion for which the president absolutely should be impeached. But these latest developments, or this growing amount of evidence incriminating the Biden crime family, we have not seen anything like this, certainly in modern times, certainly not in our political lifetime. This makes the reasons for which President Clinton was impeached 30 years ago pale by comparison. And it certainly obviously makes a mockery, or an even greater mockery of the impeachment reasons that were brought against President Trump, which were political in nature, as we know. But here you have the president having done the very things that President Trump was, I believe, incorrectly accused of talking about on a phone call. This president certainly has done. Jamie Comer and House Oversight Committee are doing a great job, I think, uncovering more and more evidence, doing their best to bring it to the American people.
I saw Speaker McCarthy put out a statement saying that this cynical move of a special counsel is not going to derail the investigations in the House, said that it was really meant to try to slow things up and basically cover up what was really going on. Same thing with Representative James Comer. Congressman Scalise said that. So I know you're all in recess, but is there a delay here? I mean, I expected by now that actually some sort of progress would be made in terms of empowering one of the standing committees to pursue an impeachment process.
Well, I would hope the Speaker would do that. I would hope that he would tell Jamie Comer and the House Oversight Committee, which I think is the committee that it makes most sense to move forward based on what they have uncovered. As you know, tremendous amount of growing, credible eyewitness testimony that's been corroborated by more than one individual. This needs to be brought to the American people. Half the country still, I think, Larry, doesn't even know about this because, as you know, it's not really being covered by the large daily newspapers or some of the large non-conservative networks.
Well, if it is being covered, it's being covered up. I mean, it's pretty remarkable how the day after Biden has a bad news cycle, boom, we've got more indictments against President Trump, and suddenly that's all anybody's talking about.
Yes, as you noted earlier, David Weiss is a deflection, making him special counsel. Even the large daily newspapers or larger papers in my district who have not covered it, they did one little story just recently. They're all owned by the same conglomerate throughout my district, but they focused on Hunter Biden and they focused on his gun charge and his tax evasion charge. They never connected at all to President Biden or the bribery, influence peddling, corruption scandal. So they're trying to make it about Hunter. As you know, the narrative has changed, not from President Biden didn't know anything about his son's businesses, but he wasn't actually in business with his son, is what they're alleging now. And then, of course, like you said, they're trying to deflect with the David Weiss appointment, which we know he hasn't done anything to this point. He's not going to do anything as a special prosecutor either.
Yeah, Congressman Good, you noted the Trump impeachments. I know that you were in Congress for those proceedings, and I note that your Democrat colleagues have suggested that any move by Republicans to impeach President Biden would be just political, just using the impeachment process for political purposes. I wonder if you could sort of contrast these two movements for impeachment. Was there anything political about the Trump impeachment, sir?
I would say so, and it is interesting to hear Democrats talk about Republicans just want to investigate, and when they spent the 4 years of the Trump administration with the phony Russia collusion scandal that they knew was untrue, and they perpetuated a lie for 4 years, and then, of course, President Trump, setting aside the ridiculous impeachment on the phone call related to Ukraine, when he just had a week left in his term, and there was no ability to bring any consequence to him, no ability to have the Senate even attempt to convict him. It was just for retaliatory purposes, for political reasons, the same reasons why you see indictments coming now 2.5 years after January 6th, strictly for political reasons, just trying to wound the person who's the front runner for the Republican nomination.
Congressman Good, your colleague, Mr. Goldman, he's been out there saying that really there's nothing to see here, nothing happened on these phone calls. Biden was just talking about the weather with his son. He's even used this term that Hunter Biden was selling the illusion of access. Now, as a congressman, I'm guessing you need to get read in pretty well on ethics issues there. What's legal, what's not legal, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. As far as you're concerned, these phone calls that Vice President Biden participated in and the money that flowed in from those who were on the other end of those phone calls, even if they were just talking about the weather, which I doubt, just the fact that they made money off of that access, in your mind, is that against congressional ethics? Is that against the ethic laws in this town?
No question about it that it is. That this, again, influence peddling itself, selling access to the president. And you have to wonder, once again, the millions of dollars the Biden crime family made off Ukraine corrupt business dealings. How's that impacted the billions of dollars we have sent to Ukraine?
Yeah.
The millions of dollars that the Biden crime family has made off Chinese business relationships. How has that impacted the fact that we call China now a competitive partner instead of an adversary? We won't confront China. We won't criticize China. We're surrendering to China effectively on the world stage. We're being embarrassed by China. How has that been impacted by the millions of dollars this administration has made, or excuse me, this family has made from corrupt Chinese business deals?
Yeah, and by the way, since you bring up Ukraine, there is now a move for an additional funding package. As you know, I think it may be the first time you have the ability to vote on this standalone, because usually they like to wrap Ukraine funding in with, hurricane relief in Florida.
Right.
Where do you stand, and if you could, where you think the Freedom Caucus, at the very least, if not the entire Republican caucus, stands on more funding for Ukraine?
I think there's a healthy amount of skepticism for more funding for Ukraine in the Republican conference, certainly in the conservative side, and I believe among my colleagues in the House Freedom Caucus. Setting aside, again, whether or not you think that the Ukraine war is our war, if it's our fight, what the U.S. role is versus the European role, whether or not we should be going to war with to defend a non-NATO country, what the exit strategy, the end game is, what success looks like, what the level of U.S. involvement should be. All those sorts of things that can be debated, and I happen to be on the side where I don't think it's our national security interest or it justifies our involvement or our willingness to risk nuclear war with Russia. All of that said, should we be borrowing money from China to send it to Ukraine? Should we be borrowing money from China or from our kids and our grandkids to defend Ukraine's border when we're not spending any resources to defend our own border? Should we be depleting the resources and the readiness of our own military at a time when we've been weakened by this administration to send resources over to Ukraine? I think the answer to all of those is no.
Congressman, finally, as we approach the Republican debate next week, I want to ask all of the politicians I get from so-called swing states or purple states, their impression of where things are heading. First of all, do you believe Virginia is back in play now, considering the fact that Republicans won statewide with Governor Youngkin's popularity sky high right now? Is Virginia a swing state in 2024?
I hope we're going to get an indication that that is even to a greater extent the case here in November. As you know, we have state elections, our full General Assembly, House of Delegates, House of Senate. We've got races up. And so my hope would be we're going to take the Senate. We're going to increase our numbers in the House, give Governor Youngkin a working majority in the state legislature. And I think Virginia could be a test case for the country. Virginia is purple, leans a little blue, but we had a big victory last year, as you know. And my hope is 2 years ago. And my hope is we'll have another big victory here in November and show where the country is, that the country is waking up to who the Democrat Party is, how this is not the Democrat Party of our parents and our grandparents. These are extremists. They hate the country. They hate the founders. They hate the Constitution. They're trying to make us into a communist, socialist, totalitarian state. And these harmful policies that are crushing middle-class families, that are direct, the harm that we're suffering at the grocery store, when you're trying to make your house or your rent payments, the interest rates, the utility prices, gas prices, and so forth. That's a direct result of Biden policies. And hopefully Virginia will send us a huge message that's a precursor for what will happen next year.
Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. We will touch base with you again, especially when you get back into session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Larry. Great to be with you again.
There is more to come on O'Connor tonight. Keep it here. You're watching Salem News Channel. This week is the one-year anniversary of the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. They actually had the gall to celebrate this at the White House and claimed that it's working. Bidenomics is working. Boy, I'd hate to see what it looks like around here if Bidenomics were failing. Representative Kevin Hern, Republican from Oklahoma's 1st District and also chairman of the very important Republican Study Committee, joins us now. Well, Congressman Hern, Bidenomics is working. What do you say?
Well, I think he misread. I think it should read bad economics. The guy is just, it's after the fact. Here's the thing. The Democrats bought into this Inflation Reduction Act because they knew it sounded really good. Nobody believed it then. Democrats really didn't believe it, but that's what they sold the American people because Build Back Better didn't. Nobody believed that either.
Yeah.
The president admitted finally they wish he hadn't called it that. But the $1.2 trillion that he said then it was going to cost was really great for America and the American debt that we're seeing. However, You're also hearing today that everyone estimates now that it's going to cost somewhere 3 times that. And guess what? Headline to all Americans that the majority of that money is going to overseas companies and companies making more than $1 billion a year in revenues. It's not going up to stand up new companies.
Yeah, I want to get to that point in a second. We actually have some audio from John Podesta in the White House to back that up. But first, on this inflation reduction lie, I actually saw journalists yesterday tweeting out, well, when they signed this a year ago, inflation was 8.5%, and now it's only 3.6%, so inflation has gone down. Sir, clearly they did not pay attention in economics class. Can you explain about how the inflation index is a year-over-year number, and so it's actually still pretty bad around here? In fact, 8 last year plus another 3.5 this year. That puts us up to about 12% 2 years off.
It is amazing the voodoo math that goes on in Washington, D.C. to placate the voters. And it's really sad how the American voters are hoodwinked. But you're exactly right, Larry. We're some 12% above where we were in 21, and nothing in sight. We saw today mortgage rates hit the highest in over 20 years. It's going to have and is having impact on housing and people trying to buy new houses. The reality is, I saw a number the other day that said that very few people are seeing the mortgage hit because so few people now are buying homes that they're just staying in the homes they're in. So right. This is having a trickle-down effect that's going to be really negative for a long time.
Which is actually slowing down a housing market that was on fire for a while there. And by the way, the residual markets, if you've got a good housing market, that means you have a good mortgage refinance market, original mortgage market, and it's killed those as well. Congressman Hearn, as you mentioned, President Biden has said that maybe we shouldn't have called it the Inflation Reduction Act. Here's John Podesta yesterday at the White House.
To stop these disasters from getting even worse, we have to cut the carbon pollution that's driving the climate crisis, and that's what the Inflation Reduction Act is all about.
The Inflation Reduction Act is really all about cutting carbon. I got to ask you, some of your Democrat colleagues, when they were on the bubble last year going into the midterms, would they have signed a bill that was cut the carbon in our atmosphere bill versus the Inflation Reduction Act?
Absolutely not. This was purely political naming this. You know, the thing is, Larry, there's really 3 things that control our national security that we deal with every single day. First one is our energy security, second is border security, and third is economic security. This president and these Democrats are failing miserably at all 3. The Republicans have passed H.R. 1, an energy protection, return us to a dominant position we had just 36 months ago. The second is securing our southern border, and the third we're working right now is to get our spending under control. And we did that with the debt limit deal. We've got to continue working on our budget and get these appropriations done. American people are tired of suffering.
And let's be clear, all of these so-called green energy initiatives that are subsidized and paid for by this bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, I saw a study, Congressman Hearn, that said all of these devices and all of these solar panels and all of these batteries for electric cars, the one nation on this planet that benefits the most from all of those items that we're now paying for is China. China is the best beneficiary of the Inflation Reduction Act.
Well, in addition to the Congo, where child labor is mining the cobalt needed for the batteries out there, 90%, 95% of the cobalt in the world comes from there. 90 to 95% is refined and processed in China. So we're going from an administration that is pushing us not only to be dependent on places like Russia and the Middle East and Venezuela, places that don't really care much for us, on our oil, our fossil fuels that are needed, to now we're also going to be dependent over the next generations on items that need to make up our batteries. And so this president does not care about the sovereignty of this nation, does not care about where we're getting our energy from. And all these countries have to do is say, we're not going to give it to you. And when they say that, how are you going to drive your car? How are you going to expand on your wind energy, your solar panels? Because you're going to be dependent on places like China that doesn't care that we ever have a leadership position ever in the future.
Congressman Hearn, Congress is in recess right now, but that's not a vacation. You're back in your home districts, you're getting district business done, and most importantly, you're hearing from your constituents. You're hearing from the voters. I wonder, what have you heard there in the 1st District of Oklahoma regarding the Biden crimes that have been uncovered, the lies that have been uncovered, and most importantly, last Friday's cynical, transparent move by Merrick Garland to put David Weiss in as a special counsel? That's the the fox watching the hen house. David Weiss should be under investigation for his behavior in this entire process. What are you hearing?
Well, people are sick and tired of the two-tiered justice system that they know that the everyday American could never get to have to happen to them. I mean, it's just insane what's happened. You know, Ways and Means, we had the two IRS whistleblowers come forward, Shapley and Ziegler, and tell us their stories, both identified as Democrats. Ziegler identified, as somebody who was conservative, gay, that did not, this is not about politics. This is about, they're infuriated that they said, two-tiered system of justice. People they normally go through the process with and find, evidence on, they were stonewalled at every angle, from the judges, from, people they were trying to get search warrants from. So we're seeing this. We did this process on the Ways and Means, sent this to the Oversight Committee with Jamie Comer and the Judiciary with Jim Jordan. They're doing their work to methodically walking through. You and I were talking just a few minutes ago about, the alleged emails that are coming back from the Biden administration, the Biden when he was vice president.
Yeah.
And did he use an alias to write those? I mean, here's the thing. The Democrats are not disputing anything the IRS agents are saying. What we know now is some $17 million of unreported income, millions of dollars of unreported taxes, and they gave Hunter Biden a potential plea deal of $100,000. Insane. Glad the judge set it aside. Game on. We're going to continue to work forward. We're going to make the connections. And my guess is in the very near future, you're going to see an impeachment inquiry on the president of the United States of America.
Let's talk about those emails you just referenced, because we were talking about it, but it was right before we went on the air earlier today. Chairman Comer wants unredacted emails. He cited one in particular that references a 9 a.m. phone call with President Poroshenko, Ukrainian president, and that was an email sent to Robert L. Peters. Robert L. Peters is a pseudonym, a fake name that Joe Biden used on official emails. Congressman, do you have any understanding as to why a vice president would need to use a fake name on official emails? And incidentally, before you answer, several of these emails included his son Hunter Biden and his partner Devin Archer.
Well, clearly this vice president, then president now, knew that he was doing something that he didn't want anybody else to know, wanted to have deniability. And now through, my guess is through testimony and through whistleblowers and through other evidentiary discovery that this has been found. And, this is just part of a greater narrative that we're working on right now in our judiciary committees and our oversight committees, that is our constitutional responsibility to have oversight over the executive branch. And for everybody out there watching, it is so important that we not only impeach this president, but we convict this president. And the way you're going to do that is to walk methodically through the process with evidence and facts that show that Joe Biden had connection to Ukraine and to China and sold his soul for the sake of money to discredit the relationships that we have in this country as a leader in a free world, committed treason. The list is going to go on, but this is at the highest level of corruption that we probably have not seen in a generation or maybe ever in the 247 years of our existence.
The standard for impeachment, of course, in the Constitution is treason, bribery, or high crimes and misdemeanors. Looks like he's hit a triple here, the trifecta. Congressman Hearn will leave it there. By the way, this Robert Peters guy, it could be Joe Biden's imaginary friend, right? I mean, we saw his interaction with the Easter Bunny that one time. We'll have to find out.
Who knows?
Thank you, Congressman. There's more to come. You're watching Salem News Channel. Well, it's hurricane season here in the United States, and of course, recent hurricanes come to mind when we think of the devastating, horrible loss that they can inflict, like Katrina and Andrew, and of course, Mitch. Mitch? What's Mitch, you may ask? Don't remember Mitch? Don't remember how apparently it was the worst hurricane in the history of mankind. It occurred in 1999, and immigration activists here in the United States of America want to continue certain protections that were given to refugees of that hurricane now 24 years later. Well, that was a hell of a hurricane. Let's bring in Mark Krikorian, Executive Director for the Center for Immigration Studies. You can't make it up, Mark. We still have to extend refugee status to people 24 years after Hurricane Mitch?
Yeah, it's even worse than that, actually, because the protections, it's called temporary protected status.
Temporary?
Was for,
temporary.
Right, exactly. That's literally what it's called, TPS. But it was for people who were here already as illegal aliens to get them work permits so that they wouldn't have to go back.
Oh.
And every year and a half, it's been renewed over and over, and they come up with new excuses. One time, they used the excuse, because this was for people from Honduras, that there was a problem with the coffee plants, some kind of blight on the leaves, and that was the excuse that the government gave for renewing yet again this so-called temporary status. So, frankly, there's nothing as permanent as a temporary refugee, and this is something Congress has to fix, because unfortunately, presidents have the authority to do this technically.
Also, my understanding was that for the most part, it was Nicaraguans and Hondurans who were affected by this. And now I read they want to extend this to Venezuelans. So in other words, for the last 24 years, Venezuelans really weren't covered by it, but now suddenly Venezuelans are newfound victims of Hurricane Mitch 24 years later?
No, they wouldn't use the hurricane as an excuse in this case. They keep coming up with different things, because there's literally hundreds of thousands of people from different countries who have this so-called temporary protected status.
I see.
There are people from Liberia who I think at this point are in 20 plus years. It's a similar thing because there was a civil war. The civil war ended. A new civil war started. That civil war ended. And the illegal immigrants who were here were lucky enough, basically, to be here when all that stuff happened, just get to stay and keep their work permits. And eventually, I mean, some of them are grandparents at this point.
Yeah.
And the whole point is, if they can just kick the can down the road over and over again, eventually we'll let them stay for good.
See, and something like this that just doesn't pass the smell test, you would think, especially coming into a big election year, that Congress could actually pass something that fixes this, as you put it. But the problem is, well, you tell me what the problem is if they try.
There's no way the Democrats would agree to fix this. And in fact, in this particular part of the immigration puzzle, it's probably not that hard to fix politically, because you would have to basically legalize the people, amnesty the people who'd been here for a long time under this so-called temporary status, because we did give them this legal status. Now, they're still illegal aliens, but they're illegal aliens whom we temporarily give work permits to. But you legalize them, and that's what the advocacy groups want. You have to, at the same time, get rid of this provision in the law so it doesn't happen again in the future.
Right.
Nobody on the anti-border side is willing to even discuss anything like that.
Well, and also they always say, oh, sure, we'll entertain that, but it has to be part of, say it with me, comprehensive immigration reform. Right? Exactly. So they can't just do one thing that makes sense. They have to wrap it all up into a thing that will end up with amnesty for 11, 12, 13, maybe 20 million who are here illegally.
And increase immigration dramatically. Because remember, all of those things aren't just amnesty. All the various, Bush tried something, it got shot down. Obama tried something, it got shot down. They all seek to dramatically increase immigration as well as amnesty everybody who's here. And frankly, put in a mechanism to amnesty future illegal aliens as well.
Meanwhile, in Texas, Governor Abbott and his National Guard and various other security agencies there, they've tried to stem the tide of illegal crossings in the Rio Grande. They put in these floats, basically, that keep people from crossing the river. And they're being sued by the Justice Department over this. Wait, I mean, I'm glad the Justice Department has a lot of time on their hands, but what's the beef with the state of Texas doing something that seems quite reasonable and, oh, by the way, effective?
Because they're trying to interrupt illegal immigration. That's the problem. In other words, this administration does not want to permit Texas to do anything to obstruct illegal crossings. And these buoys, it's only about 1,000 feet of them so far, but in a very high intensity crossing area. They're these red balls, and you can't get over them because if you grab the thing, it rolls and, you go back down. And there's a net under it. It's been totally effective. No one's even gone near it. It's not just the Justice Department on the behalf of the Biden administration that's trying to stop it. The Fish and Wildlife Service has magically discovered that there's some kind of shellfish on the river bottom just where these things are, and they're now considering declaring it an endangered species in order to come up with yet another excuse to try to prevent Texas from stopping illegal immigration.
They're just not on America's side sometimes. Mark or Corey, at least it doesn't seem that way. One other item in the news, I find this interesting. Because of the influx of illegal immigrants that are living on the streets and have become a strain on social services, the administration is now releasing $100 million of funds that had been tagged for just this sort of crisis and sending it down to the border state. Oh, I'm sorry, not to the border states. They're sending it to New York. Mark, they're sending it to New York. I mean, if Kirsten Sinema even down in Arizona is ticked off about this.
Yeah, it's unbelievable that New York gets they've had about 10 or 11,000 illegal immigrants from the border bust by Texas up there. And that's a national emergency, whereas that's about 2 days worth of illegal crossings at the border. There are little towns in Texas and then somewhat bigger cities, El Paso and what have you, but these are not big cities. They're having to deal with this stuff. New York gets the tiniest fraction of what they're experiencing, and apparently it's the end of the world. The only good side is, at least seems like some Democrats are understanding that all of their sanctuary policies and anti-borders policies do have a consequence. They have a cost. And I got to say, Texas Governor Abbott's initiative of busing people to New York City has probably been the most politically effective thing in immigration in a long time to get people to focus on the issue. Agreed.
However, as long as the administration's there to sign a $100 million check to alleviate that strain on those sanctuary states, what's preventing them? I mean, what's the harm? They might as well, as long as they get a payday out of it, they don't care.
Yeah, true. But even money doesn't solve the problem of thousands of them, illegal immigrant kids, showing up next month in New York's public schools, which of course are wonderfully effective and doing a great job of educating the kids there.
Right.
And, they're still, even if they have the money, they still are putting them up in hotels. They're all over the streets. New York City is trying to bust them out of New York City into the suburbs. So, a little money is what they want, but it's not going to solve the problem for them. You've got to address the root cause, which is taking a nap in the Oval Office. That's got to be fixed so that we start enforcing the law before people get into the country.
Mark Krikorian, Center for Immigration Studies. Thank you, sir. Always good to talk with you.
Thank you.
There is more to come on O'Connor tonight. Keep it here. This is the Salem News Channel. Here in Washington, there's a bunch of inside the Beltway political types, the usual suspects. They've caught the vapors this week because former President Donald Trump has announced that he will not sign the so-called Beat Biden pledge. Now, the Republican National Committee has insisted that all candidates have to sign this pledge if they wish to participate in the debate scheduled to begin next Wednesday in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Now, the pledge is tantamount to a loyalty pledge. It commits each candidate to support the party's nominee regardless of the outcome of the pending primary season. Now, obviously, it makes sense that Ronna McDaniel, the RNC's seemingly once and future chairperson, would want the field of politicians to commit to supporting the chosen one. What's the point of a political party process if the sore losers can take their ball and go home if they end up losing? Or even worse, start their own competing game with their ball. However, the histrionics over Trump's refusal are beyond disingenuous, considering a couple of hard-to-ignore factors. First and foremost, Trump is far and away the front-runner in this campaign. He's over 50% nationally now, according to the Real Clear Politics average of polls, and he's trouncing every single pretender in the New Hampshire primary polls. Governor Ron DeSantis is a distant third in New Hampshire behind Chris Christie. I mean, really, it seems kind of insulting to force Trump to sign a loyalty pledge to himself. He dominates the field. He holds sway over the largest, most passionate bloc of voters, MAGA. But even more significant is the hypocrisy here of the RNC, demanding loyalty from Trump, considering what happened in 2015. Oh yeah, we remember, guys. Then Chairman Reince Priebus forced a pledge on all the GOP nominees that year. The pledge read, and take a look at it, I, state your name, affirm that if I do not win the 2016 Republican nomination for President of the United States, I'll endorse the 2016 Republican presidential nominee, regardless of who it is. I further pledge that I will not seek to run as an independent or write-in candidate, and I won't seek the nomination of another party. Let's be real. Given the actual intent of the pledge at the time, it should have read, I, Donald Trump, promise not to run third party if I lose. Because that's really all Jeb and Kasich and Carly cared about back then. They were terrified that when they, the establishment candidates, won the nomination, because, well, of course they'd win, Trump would then throw some hissy fit and do a Ross Perot. Priebus was so happy when he got Trump to sign the pledge. He actually made a big show of it in front of TV cameras in the Trump Tower lobby. I hold in my hand a pledge that, well, of course, that pledge was worthless. Once Trump won the nomination, how'd everybody work out with that party loyalty? Jeb refused to endorse or support him. Donald Trump has not demonstrated the temperament or strength of character, he said on Facebook. These are reasons why I cannot support his candidacy. Oh, but Jeb, you signed a pledge. Carly went on to oppose Trump's nomination, spoke out against the idea of party loyalty in the 2020 primaries. In 2019, she tweeted, in this country, we pledge allegiance to the flag, not the president. We swear fidelity to the Constitution, not the party. Yeah. Where's all that party loyalty? And Kasich was the worst of all. Kasich spoke at the 2020 Democrat convention on behalf of Joe Biden. There's your loyalty pledge, Rana. So why in the hell should Trump sign a loyalty pledge that's literally unenforceable? And the very same RNC allowed it to be violated by Bush and Kasich. He shouldn't sign. Of course he shouldn't. And more importantly, Ronna McDaniel should have never insisted on it in the first place. It's insulting to Trump. It's hypocritical, and worse, she's now put herself in a horrible situation. Let's say Trump shows up in Milwaukee next Wednesday. Let's say he comes in and he says, okay, I'm ready to debate. And I think he should, by the way. Is Ronna going to stand in the doorway keeping him from the set? Is she going to say, nope, you got to sign this pledge or you're not allowed to debate? Seriously? If she does that, then the debate is no longer the biggest story of the night. Her sideshow has now undermined all the other candidates. And if she does let him debate without signing the pledge, then she shows that the pledge is a complete sham in the first place, and she insults all the other candidates who were compelled to sign it. Either way, this is a completely self-inflicted mess of a situation. It's wrong. It's insulting to you, the voter, as well as to Donald Trump, and it could have all been avoided. It's sad. To paraphrase Will Rogers, I don't belong to any organized political party. I'm a Republican. That's it for tonight. More to come tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, see you on the radio.